Hi, everybody. I hope you enjoy my lecture on understanding moral relativism and that it gives you some things to think about as we make our way through this unit. So, what is moral relativism? If you've already taken a look at the chapter, you're going to have a basic idea of what it is, but if you haven't, this is meant to give you kind of an overview. Moral relativism is the idea that moral judgments and values are not absolute, but they're relative to culture, historical or personal perspectives of individuals and groups. That would mean that there are no universal moral truths. So, what is considered right or wrong depends on the context. Some examples of moral relativism would be that some cultures eat insects and it's normal and celebrated. But that others see it as repulsive. Another example of moral relativism might be that some cultures practice polygamy, but in the United States, it's not seen as something that we practice and is considered morally unethical. So there are different types of moral relativism. There's cultural relativism, and that means that morality is defined by the culture that we live in, our cultural norms, what we agree on as moral as a culture. So what is right in one society might be wrong in another. There are no universal standards that apply to all cultures. One example of this might be gender roles or dress codes or treatment of the elderly. So individual or personal relativism, also known as subjectivism, that's based on our own moral judgments, what we think personally, what we believe, so our own beliefs and feelings. And then we often might say to somebody, what's right for you might not be right for me. Situational relativism is when morality depends on the context or the situation, as you'll see in the TED Talk that is present in our first discussion. So situational relativism is a single act, might be morally justified in one case and unjustified in another. For example, perhaps you lost your job, but you need to feed your family. Is it morally ethical in this particular situation to steal food from your neighbor? Something to think about. So there are arguments that are in favor of moral relativism, and there are arguments and objections to moral relativism, as you'll see as we navigate through this unit. So arguments in favor of moral relativism include that it promotes tolerance and understanding and encourages respect for different cultures and values, and avoids the idea of moral imperialism, which is imposing our values on somebody else. Another argument in favor of moral relativism is that it reflects real moral diversity. It recognizes that humans disagree deeply about ethics, even within the same society. A third argument in favor of moral relativism is that it avoids ethnocentrism. It challenges the assumption that one's own cultural norms are superior to another culture's. And it adapts to complexity. Moral situations are rarely black and white. Relativism accounts for nuance and differing life experiences. However, there are some critiques of moral relativism. The first critique is that moral incoherence or contradiction, that if we say everything is relative, then no one can ever be wrong, even about genocide, slavery, or abuse. This leaves us with a paralysis in ethical judgment. It makes it hard to condemn clearly harmful practices like child labor, torture, or systemic oppression. It's also a self-defeating argument. The claim there are no universal truths is itself a universal claim. And then finally, it undermines moral progress. If societies define right and wrong, how can we say that ending slavery or granting women the vote was progress? So just a little bit about moral relativism versus moral universalism. So moral relativism means that morality is culture-bound or individual, tolerant of diversity, may accept conflicting truths. On the other hand, moral universalism means that some values might be true for all people. You can judge harmful practices as wrong. And there is the belief in objective ethical standards. So we'll be taking a look at moral universalism later on in the class, but for now, this just gives you an overview and a comparison of the two. So in conclusion, moral relativism does offer a compelling lens through which to view cultural diversity and personal belief, but it does raise some serious questions about moral judgment, responsibility, and a possibility of ethical progress. So understanding this debate can help us navigate these complex and interconnected world with a greater care, empathy, and intellectual honesty. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on moral relativism in our discussion and assignments this week. Hope you enjoyed this short lecture.